Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Parenting with Pride, our monthly webinar. I am so excited for tonight. I think I say that every month, but I truly am very excited about tonight's guest speaker. I feel like we have a celebrity in the house um, with Ms. Rebecca Miner, but folks, like I want to give everyone a few minutes to get on. We've had an incredible RSVP. We've had over 100 folks register to hear tonight's presentation. So I want to give everybody time to kind of join and get comfortable and maybe grab, a little drink or, relax. It's the end of the day. We're halfway through the week. And I'm really excited that you're here. So if you are comfortable and would like to put your name, your pronouns, where you're coming from today in the chat, feel free to do that. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jennifer Solomon. I am the Parent and Family Support Manager for Equality Florida. My pronouns are she, her, and I am coming to you from all the way down at the bottom of Florida. I am in Miami. And so if folks want to join our chat, I also want to let you know that if this is your first time, welcome. We've had a really great outreach, Parenting with Pride. We've done a ton of stuff on social media and outreach. And so we got a lot of folks. We are at over 3,500 families part of our Parenting with Pride family. And so for those of you, this is your first time joining us for our monthly webinar, I really want to extend a warm welcome and let you know that this is a safe space. We will be recording our webinar, but we will leave at the end our Q&A. So if there's anything that you have questions about and it's somewhat personal and you don't want that recorded, save it for the end. We will not have that recording. And we do house this in our YouTube channel so that folks that aren't, I get people all the time saying, that's the exact time I have to take my kid to dance or to baseball. And so we want to make sure we're accessible for everyone. So we will have the recording. But again, just I want to let you know that so y'all feel comfortable being here. And let's see, with that, I know we have a whole hour and the hour goes by so fast. So I am going to get started and introduce you to our speaker tonight. When I saw the name of your book, Rebecca, I, being a mom of many children, my oldest being in her 30s, I remember getting the book, What to Expect When Expecting. And that was like my Bible. And for the parents on here that have older kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That was the book that you had any question about, you flipped through, and it was kind of the closest thing we had to a to like a manual. And so when I saw your book, What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting This, it hit home for me because I love that. I don't know if you did a play on that, but it really, you did. Okay, good. It resonated with me. And I think it resonates with a lot of folks, especially folks that have kids in the LGBTQ community. We want that guide. We want to know what to expect because we were not expecting this. And I don't say that in a negative way. I know that our kids are absolute wonderful human beings that have taught us so much. My son has taught me more than I ever could have imagined. He's opened my eyes in so many ways. And I know I speak for so many families, but at the same time, we live in such a scary place. And many of us worry about our kids' safety, and we worry about their mental health, and we worry about the world. And so we are so excited to invite you into our Parenting with Pride home tonight. And I will give you a little professional bio, and then I'm going to turn it over to you. Rebecca Miner is a queer clinician, consultant, and educator specializing in the intersection of trauma, gender, and sexuality. And I'm not going to read your whole thing, but I'm going to give the highlights. You have authored articles on LGBTQ plus youth, contributed to textbooks, and you are frequently quoted as an expert on gender affirming care. And I absolutely love that. You are the founder of Prism Therapy Collective, and you are internationally recognized in consulting and parent coaching. Your work supports organizations, schools, and businesses, building cultural responsiveness and inclusivity. You also lead Bi Plus Indivisibility, a community for Bi Plus people navigating their queer identity in the context of a straight presenting relationship. You are also a faculty member, lecturer at Boston University School of Social Work, and now the author of this amazing brand new book, Raising Trans Kids, What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting This. And so I'm going to turn the mic over to you, and I'm going to be sitting back taking notes for myself, and I invite everyone else to really enjoy this presentation. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Can everyone see my screen okay? Great. So as you heard, my name is Rebecca Miner. I use she, her, or they pronouns. And I am so excited to be with you all this evening to talk about my new book, Raising Trans Kids, What to Expect When You Weren't Expecting This. So you already got an in-depth explanation of my bio, but for context, I've spent the better part of, over a decade now, working with queer and trans youth in their journey of becoming and as a guide to their parents and families in affirming it. If tonight you're like, oh my goodness, there's so much more for me to learn, I need resources, I promise you it's probably on my website. And also Equality Florida has tons of resources available for you as well. But please know if you feel like you need a glossary of terms or guidance around maybe a young person who just came out, all of that is available for free on my website. So I will reference things as we chat, and know that you don't need to take notes furiously tonight, because you'll have an opportunity to access information afterwards. So I spend the bulk of my time as a therapist, writing, speaking, consulting, as you heard, and also teaching other clinicians. And one of my very favorite things to do is to support families. And that's really why I wrote this book. I found myself time and time again sitting with parents and caregivers who were having the same questions coming up for them over and over again. And I knew that there were books out there that touched on these subject matters already, and some of them are fantastic and wonderful resources. And we know that this field has rapidly shifted in the last decade, and certainly the last handful of years. Language has evolved, current policies have evolved. And so I wanted to create a resource that would be accessible and available to families who needed to flip to the very thing they were concerned about, who maybe don't have the time to read the entire chapter, but like Jennifer was saying with What to Expect When You're Expecting, you could flip to the one thing you were worried about or trying to figure out at that point and get the information that you needed. So it's really designed to be an accessible guide, and not feel like a textbook or something heavy where you can't skip around and kind of use it as you need. So the book is divided into, each chapter is about a question that keeps parents and caregivers up at night. Because that was really what I kept hearing from families, was like, these are the things I'm worried about. And I also want to say, when I say parents and caregivers, that caregiver part includes everyone really who cares about young people, whether that's as a clinician or as an educator, as a grandparent, as whatever your familial role or life role, or your neighbor, or just anyone. I want this information to feel like it's not just for people who have trans kids, but it's for anyone who cares about kids. Because part of what we're getting at is being better educated about all of this, so that when these topics show up in your life, it's not a total surprise. And so you feel like you're armed with the information and resources you need to be able to support. Because that's what I kept seeing time and time again, was people would have the best of intentions, but lack the education or information, not out of, because they don't care, but simply because it wasn't something they were taught. And now we're seeing it's something that people are purposely not being taught, especially in the state, depending on your state laws and things. You've seen attempts at kind of barring this information so that it becomes something that feels like a secret. And that's the opposite of what we want. So I divided the book into five segments. One is about understanding gender and identity, right? Really start at the very beginning. Then thinking about decision-making and support, concerns about well-being and safety, because those were ones that came up consistently. The family, social, and cultural impact, right? So how will this affect our whole family, our friends, our faith communities, our cultural backgrounds? How does all of this kind of intertwine, and how do we make sense of it? And then how do we move from understanding to action? So I want to share with you, and it's going to look like a long list, so don't panic, but I'm going to share with you the list of chapters, and it's a list of questions. And I want you to take a minute and read through these and share with me in the chat, if you will, which of these you feel like stands out to you, maybe surprises you, or is something that is currently keeping you up at night. Will they have a hard life? Will they ever be safe? What if they're wrong and change their mind? Will they ever be safe again? Aren't they too young to know? Why didn't they show signs? Will they ever be safe? Will they be safe? Yeah, what if they're neurodivergent? Can they know? Will they have a hard life? Aren't there only two genders? That's confusing. Yeah. Will they be safe? So we're seeing a lot of repeat of will they ever be safe? And then there's the question of, am I going to lose my child? Which could be taken in a number of different ways, right? Whether that's losing the sense of who you think that person is or the life you imagined for them, or if you also mean that in the sense of safety. Any questions here that surprise you or that you haven't thought about? Any questions you feel like are missing? Maybe something that you're quite concerned about. Thank you for bringing that up, right? Do we need to rewrite history? Do I need to change all the pictures in my house? And I'm happy to talk about that. Yeah, how do I tell my family members? And that is definitely captured in these chapters, because those are some of these big questions we talk about. And then certainly, yes, in this current climate, right, worrying about authority figures labeling you as a bad caregiver, which I wish wasn't something you ever had to think about, but it certainly is. Yeah, identification on passports and doctor's licenses. Yeah, driver's licenses. Yeah, and helping family members accept. So, I think what would probably be much more fruitful for us is to actually dig into some of these questions. I prepared an exercise for us for this evening to do if there wasn't a bevy of questions to pull from, but it looks like there's plenty for us to dig into. So I think rather than move forward with a kind of formal presentation, I want to be here for you now, and just acknowledge too that we're in a very scary moment currently. And I imagine many of you attending tonight are arriving with a certain amount of kind of tenderness, given the news as of late, just the increasing concern. And as we saw in your response to these questions, the overwhelming concern is about safety. What this says about you as a caregiver and how to help people in your life understand. So I just want to name that we are in an especially acute time. And so if you're feeling quite emotional about this or feeling overwhelmed, you are not alone in that experience. And that is exactly why I wrote this book, to really meet you where you are in the moments when you're scared or you're not sure what to do. And so let's talk about it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that it feels more like we're in conversation with each other. And I think just start to address some of these things you brought up in the chat. The first of which is, do we need to rewrite history? Right? How do we address things like pictures in the home? So that chapter was born out of a session I had with a parent. And there's a case study in the book where I talk about this client and her experience of her child wanting to update their birth certificate and the experience of what that felt like for her as a mother to want to affirm her child's identity and want to have paperwork that aligns with their other documentation, but also the feelings of grief and this feeling of like, but that was my birth story. And in my birth story, I gave birth to a baby girl. And going back to that document and changing that letter feels hard. And it feels like a changing of something that was one of the most powerful and important days of my life. And so there's that push and pull here of like, how do I show up for my kid while also holding my own experience as a parent? And ultimately, she did change the document and everything worked itself out, right? We processed what that meant for her and that it didn't mean that she didn't give birth to the baby she thought she did that day, but that that was her memory that she's allowed to hold, but that this document doesn't represent what happened that day. It actually represents her being proactive and supporting her child so that in their future, when they go to apply for a mortgage or have to do a background check, that there isn't a point in which that would get flagged as not matching their driver's license or their social security card. And so it was actually a means of protecting her child. But that brings us to this question of like, okay, what about pictures? What about our like collective family memories or traditions even? And the picture one comes up a lot in my work with parents. And I think everyone's experience of it is a little bit different. And so it's important to actually talk to the trans person in your life about what would make them feel most comfortable. Because sometimes I've advised parents to do that and they've come back the next week and said, oh my goodness, my kid said it was fine to keep up pictures from when they were 3 years old. And that they're like, yeah, mom, I'm just a baby. Like, it's not about my gender at that point. Or some people have said, I just don't want the ones of when I was like 13 or like awkwardly going through puberty, which many of us don't want, regardless of gender identity. But I think there's an assumption that like, I have to erase everything and we have to hide our past to support this person. And if that is what they need, that may be something that they need for a period of time. It may not be forever. And it doesn't mean that you have to destroy the images, right? You don't have to throw them all away, but maybe you don't have them up on the wall on the way to your family room anymore, right? Maybe you replace them with current pictures of your family. And these are compromises we make for love, right? So that your child, your grandchild, or whomever it is feels safe and comfortable and affirmed when they're at home. Because we know the world is pretty scary, especially right now. But we know that when parents and caregivers show up and support the young trans kids in their life, their risk of depression, anxiety, suicidality all drops dramatically. And so, you know, it's a both and of like, is it sad to take down the pictures? Yes. And if it's life-saving, I think it's worth it. And you don't have to erase the memories, right? You don't have to change your birth story. You don't have to get rid of everything. But you can also think about it as an opportunity to shift things a little bit, right? Another example in the book is a family who had ornaments that they made for each of their kids every year. And it had their names on them and, you know, some visible traits of like what they looked like. And so this mom was then like, well, what do I do? You know, like if I'm going to go decorate the Christmas tree, we've got all these ornaments. Like, do we need to get rid of all the ornaments? What do we like? How does this work? And instead, she decided to adopt a new tradition of making new ornaments for all of her kids, not just her trans kid, but that represented them now in life and not just the ones from when they were 2 or 4 or, you know, the little handprint ones you get from preschool. And instead, they adopted a new tradition. And it meant so much to her kid to be like, I really feel seen in this moment. Like you chose to use my name and you made the little ornament with my current hair and like how I like to be perceived. And there was an opportunity to kind of shift their family narrative. So to the person who's asking if you need to change all the pictures in your house, I would say talk to your kid. Because before you go making a ton of changes, they may not want that. They may not need that. Or there may be certain ones that they're like, yeah, that one in the ballet outfit makes me uncomfortable. But like the baby ones don't bother me at all. Or, you know, whatever the case may be. So I think just don't assume that everything needs to be erased. And instead, be curious about what's going to feel best for them. So, other questions? How do I tell my family members, right? Or how do I help family members truly accept? Oh, and see, someone else shared in the chat here. I'm so glad that they asked their kiddo and they were told not to change the photos. And when they asked about their charm bracelet, they appreciated that they had a new charm made. Now that they're non-binary, you could ask again. Yeah. Yeah. So helping family members truly accept is not always an easy task, especially depending on their beliefs, kind of how they were raised, what education they've received. And sometimes if they're a particularly religious person, they may have strongly ingrained beliefs or cultural beliefs around gender. And so I think the best thing you can do is provide them with information and remind them that your child is still the same person that they've known and loved, but they're actually a more authentic version of themselves. And that it's actually a really special thing that they decided to be open and honest with you all about who they are rather than hiding. And so what would it look like for them to be open to getting to know this person now in the fullness of who they are? And you may have to make some difficult choices at times about how much you want to engage or not engage with someone. Um, you may have family members who are so adamant about their feelings about this that they're unwilling to read anything you share with them or use your child's name or pronouns, at which point you have to make a decision about what relationships you want to prioritize and not. I'm not suggesting that the answer is always to cut people out of your life. However, I think sometimes you have to set clear limits and boundaries of especially what you're willing to expose your child to. So like if this person is repeatedly misgendering your child, maybe they're not welcome at the family barbecue where they're going to repeatedly cause harm to your child's emotional well-being if they continue this behavior. And it's okay to let people know that you're going to stand by your child and you hope they join you in that. But these are not easy conversations or discussions to have. And it's also a really good reason to have community and be able to connect with other parents and caregivers who are going through this too, so that you don't feel alone. Someone mentioned in the chat that finding a PFLAG chapter nearby is a great resource, and I would absolutely agree with that. I think the more family members or people in general are exposed to more trans people's stories and feel personally connected to them, it becomes harder to see them as other. And when you really start to feel like you know someone who's personally impacted, then when you see like the anti-trans legislation, for example, it hits home differently when you relate it to someone you know personally versus just this kind of nebulous concept that's out there. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any, specific scenarios too, if that's helpful to folks. Before we do that, because I know you'll want to pause the recording, I'm just going to speak to the current climate in terms of being labeled as a bad caregiver. So that is a concern that I'm hearing more and more. And depending on where you're located geographically, that concern is heightened, right? I know many folks here are in Florida. I think I saw in Arizona come in earlier. And certainly we saw in Texas, there was an attempt to pass a law that would make it so that, officials could get involved with CPS or Child Protective Services if a parent was affirming a child's gender, that would be actually a legal offense for them to have supported their child in that way. And the hope is that these types of laws don't ever actually pass and that they don't pass where you live, and that certainly that they don't pass nationally. But I think we would be remiss to pretend that that isn't a looming concern right now. I would love to tell you that that's not something you need to worry about. And I don't think on a day-to-day basis, it's something you need to worry about until you have reason to really worry about it. Because there's plenty, we have bigger fish to fry. And more importantly, on a day-to-day basis is making sure your kid feels loved and supported and seen, because that's what's going to be the best outcome for them. But I just want to validate that fear exists. And so how do we hold both fear and also hope for who our kids are becoming, our hope for the future of never having legislation like this, of not having to worry that loving and affirming your child could result in you being seen as a bad caregiver. And so again, I would say this is where community matters so much, so that you don't feel isolated in that experience. So, I'll just touch on this last piece that was brought up in the chat, and then if it's okay with you, Jennifer, we can pause the recording. So someone also mentioned feeling really concerned about the FBI threats and the Department of Ed retrieving information on trans kids from schools. And I think it's important to highlight the word threat in that, right? These are fear tactics. And as we saw with so many of the executive orders that happened just after the president went into office, those are not actual laws. They are threats. And they are designed to instill fear, and they work. And so part of our work is to remember that and to know your rights and what is actually law, and be careful where you're consuming your media from, because there's plenty of fear mongering happening right now and lots of disinformation. And so, as we saw just in the last couple of weeks, how quickly a news story can get twisted to being something related to trans people when it had nothing to do with trans people at all. And so I encourage you to be really thoughtful about where you're getting your news and also how much of it you're consuming, because it's very easy to be glued to this stuff right now and actually get yourself in such a state all the time that you're in constant kind of fight or flight. So I encourage you to be thoughtful about that, because it is too much to, it feels like drinking from a fire hose some days. And we don't want your kids to feel that, right? So taking care of yourself.
Real quick, Rebecca, and remind folks, that's how Parenting with Pride honestly came about. Exactly what you just said, because there was so much misinformation. And we know a lot of these laws, the Don't Say Gay, started here in Florida. And so we're kind of seasoned, unfortunately, in what that looks like. But the good news is that we have gotten our settlement agreement, and we are very in touch with what our rights are. I love how you said that. Like our kids' rights in schools, a lot of parents aren't fully aware of all the rights that we have. And believe it or not, even in a state like Florida, we have a lot of rights. And so I encourage anyone that has any questions about specifics, if it's something going on in your child's school, or if you're seeking care, anything like that, please reach out, because we do have networks. We do have those lifelines, right, Rebecca? Like that, yes, it's scary and it's bad, but I will tell you, our kids are doing well. Our kids are figuring it out, and as parents, it's our job to keep them safe. And that I knew that was going to come up as one of the main things, because you talk to tons of parents, I talk to tons of parents. We have PFLAG leaders on here tonight, and I know that is an ongoing thing. That's probably the number one thing, right? Is about our children's safety. And so we have a lot of safety things in place that I want folks to know about. But that's really where Parenting Pride came from. And that's why we have these webinars. And I bring folks like you that are our experts, that know what is going on. A legislative session is beginning of the year. But it's so important for us to be educated about what the bills are and what they aren't, and what they are proposed and what the end results are. And so we have our webinars, we have legislative workshops that we're going to be offering, so that you are armed with that information, because a lot of what goes out there also is very vague. And what happens is, because these are very vague, it's up to interpretation. So I just want to jump in there with that and let folks know that we do have the information for you, and please reach out if you need it. And now I will let you continue. I just had to put that in there, because you basically talked about why Parenting with Pride was born, and it was born for exactly that reason.
I'm so glad you shared it. And just to kind of ground us in the reality of the current moment, I'll share these next couple slides, and then we'll move into a Q&A that won't be on the recording. So this is the 2025 anti-trans bills tracker. And you'll notice that everything is blue except for one state. And that is because that is the one state where bills have not been passed or proposed. And I pulled this today, right? This is from September 24th, 2025 on translegislation.com. When we wrote the kind of blurb for this event, we were in the 800s when it came to anti-trans bills. That number has increased now. And that's why we have to be paying attention, because this is the impact it has on youth. And Erin in the Morning is someone who I would really like to point your attention to in terms of a source for news. She has a Substack where you can follow her and get information directly into your inbox. She is a trans journalist herself. And so I also feel good about financially supporting her work when so much of the media is not always information that is clear or can be trusted. So this really speaks specifically to youth. She also has one for adults, but given the theme of today's workshop, I wanted to highlight this youth risk map. So the red states are where the worst laws have been passed. The lighter red is high risk. The orange is moderate risk. The light blue is low risk. The darker blue is safest states with strong protections. And then you'll notice that the black with red lines is a do not travel state. So right now, Texas and Florida are considered do not travel states. And that is really a suggestion for people coming from outside of the state to not go there. But what does that mean for those of you that live in the state and want to ensure that your kids are safe? And so I want to give us an opportunity to speak frankly about that. So we'll stop the recording and I can take your questions.